She has spent 5 iconic decades building an entertainment career as a singer, actress, talk show host, and author.
For decades, she stood on stages around the world wearing one of the most recognizable smiles in show business. Millions of people watched her sing, laugh, host, and dance, and almost none of them knew what she was carrying underneath it. Marie Osmond spent nearly 40 years keeping the darkest chapter of her childhood a secret from almost everyone in her life, including her own brothers. She finally began speaking about it publicly in 2001, in a memoir that was ostensibly about postpartum depression, but that contained a revelation far heavier than that. And in the years since, at 66 years old, she has kept adding to that truth in small, deliberate pieces, right up through a candid moment on live television that still gets replayed today. This is the real story, told through what Marie Osmond has actually said in her own interviews and her own books about the years the cameras never showed you. On October 13, 1959, Olive Marie Osmond was born in Ogden, Utah, the first and only daughter of George and Olive Osmond, after the couple had already raised 8 sons. 2 of her older brothers, Verl and Tom, were born deaf, and much of the family's early performing career existed to help cover the cost of their care. The Osmond household was loud, crowded, and relentlessly public even in private, and Marie grew up as a lone girl inside a world entirely built around her brother's act. She did not get much of a normal childhood to grow into. By age, for she was appearing on the Andy Williams Show. By her early teens, she was a fixture on American television, and by 15, she and her brother Donnie had their own ABC variety show, Donnie and Marie, which premiered in 1976 and turned her into one of the most recognized teenage girls in the country almost overnight. What the audience saw was a bright, wholesome, tireless performer. What Marie has since described in her own memoirs was a childhood defined by intense scrutiny, constant work, and very little room to simply be a kid. In her book Behind the Smile, she wrote about revisiting those years and cataloging them almost like scars. Ages 3, 5, 7, 9, and 13 as years of fear and being overwhelmed. Ages 14, 16, 19, and 20 as years of being scrutinized, criticized, and sexualized. She has said plainly that of all the forms mistreatment took in her life, being sexually abused was the most damaging one. In May of 2001, Marie Osmond published Behind the Smile, My Journey Out of Postpartum Depression. The book was framed around her struggle with postpartum depression after the birth of her 7th child, but tucked inside it was something she had never told the public, and had barely told the people closest to her. As a child and teenager, she had been sexually abused more than once by more than one person. She has been consistent across more than 20 years of interviews on a few key points. The people who abused her were not her parents and not her brothers. They were people her family trusted, people who had access to her life in places her parents believed were safe. And each time it happened, she has said, she was threatened into silence, made to believe that if she told the truth, something terrible would happen to the people she loved and to the family business that supported them all. She has also said, more than once, that she did not tell even her own brothers until she was an adult with children of her own. When she finally did, she has described them as stunned, unable to understand how something like that could have happened without them noticing. What Marie has never done, in any interview across more than 2 decades, is name her abuser. When Larry King asked her directly on Larry King Live whether the abuse had happened at the hands of more than one person, she declined to give details, saying only that she preferred to keep the specifics in the past. What she did confirm, clearly and without hesitation, was that the abuse was real and that it was sexual. She has talked about it in general terms with Oprah Winfrey, with Larry King, and later with Dr. Oz, always careful to protect her family from what she has called the kind of public storm that naming someone would bring. In 2018, sitting down with Dr. Oz, she said something that seemed to finally give her some peace with the past. She told him simply that the people who had done those things to her were now dead. It was one sentence, said quietly, but it carried the weight of 40 years. Then, on October 21st, 2019, during her brief run as a co-host on The Talk, Marie said something on live television that stopped a lot of viewers cold. She told her co-host that as a child of 8 or 9 years old, she genuinely believed she might be gay. She was careful to explain why. The abuse had made her so afraid of men, and so repulsed by them, that she could not imagine wanting one anywhere near her. She has said that confusion followed her for years, and that what eventually helped her work through it was watching her father and her many brothers treat her with patience and gentleness, even when they did not understand why she sometimes pulled away from them. Over time, she has said, they quietly taught her that men could be safe. That is the most specific, most personal thing Marie Osmond has ever said publicly about the abuse she survived. She has never gone further than that, and by every indication, she does not intend to. If you are looking for the moment she named her abuser, it does not exist. What exists instead is a woman who decided, again and again, that telling the truth about what happened to her mattered more than her own comfort, while still protecting her family from a legal and public fallout she never wanted them to carry. Marie's teenage fame came at a cost that had nothing to do with abuse in traditional sense, but that she has described as its own kind of damage. During the years of Donnie and Marie, she has said she worked brutal hours memorizing hundreds of pages of script on a punishing schedule, all while standing next to some of the most photographed women in America on a weekly variety show. She has spoken candidly in interviews with outlets including Fox News Digital about how deeply that environment affected her sense of her own body and her own worth, describing herself in that era as someone who never felt she measured up no matter what she achieved. That pressure did not disappear when the cameras turned off. It followed her into adulthood, layering onto a life that already included a demanding career, a young marriage, and eventually a growing family. Marie married Stephen Craig in 1982. That marriage ended in divorce in 1985. She went on to marry film producer Brian Blosel in 1986, and together they built a large family, eventually raising 8 children, 5 of whom were adopted. That marriage lasted more than 2 decades before Marie and Brian divorced in 2007. Then, in 2011, 26 years after their first divorce, Marie remarried Stephen Craig. She has spoken about the reunion as one of the more meaningful turns of her life, framing it as proof that some things simply take their own time to come back around. After the birth of her 7th child, Matthew, in 1999, Marie experienced a postpartum depression so severe that it became the subject of her first memoir. She has described, in her own writing, sitting collapsed among her own shoes on the floor of her closet, unable to see a way out of what she was feeling. She has written about another day spent sobbing on her kitchen floor, overwhelmed by a version of herself she did not recognize. At the height of that crisis, she handed her nanny her bank card and a stack of blank checks, told her something was deeply wrong, and left, driving up the California coast alone until she could begin to understand what was happening to her. She has since said that going public about that experience, first with Oprah and then with Larry King, produced an outpouring of gratitude from other women who had never had a name for what they were feeling either. That response is part of why she wrote Behind the Smile in the first place. Not just to tell her own story, but to hand other women a vocabulary for theirs. In the fall of 2007, months after her divorce from Brian Blosel was finalized, Marie's family faced a tragedy that would change all of them permanently. Her 18-year-old son, Michael Blosel, one of the 5 children she had adopted, had entered rehab that year and had spoken with Larry King's audience, through his mother, about struggling with what she called adoption issues and difficult emotions. On the night of February 26, 2010, Michael jumped from the 8th floor of his apartment building in downtown Los Angeles, where he was a first-year student at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising. He left behind a note describing a long battle with depression and a feeling that he did not fit in anywhere. Toxicology results found no illegal substances or alcohol in his system. It was simply depression, the kind that can hide in plain sight even from a family that loves someone deeply. Marie and Donnie were performing their Las Vegas residency at the time, and the show was canceled for several days following the news. Years later, on The Talk, Marie revealed something she said she had never spoken about publicly before, that Michael had been heavily bullied in the period leading up to his death, targeted, she said, in part because of his sobriety. She said she had the messages, that they were horrendous, and that she had never taken action against the children responsible, though she said she knew who they were. She told her co-host she believed the bullying was a significant factor in how overwhelmed and alone Michael had felt. 2 weeks after his funeral, Marie went back on stage in Las Vegas. Some people were angry with her for it. She has explained in the years since that performing was the one place she knew how to keep standing, and that she needed to show her surviving children that you keep living, even when living feels unbearable. In the fall of 2007, shortly after her divorce, Marie joined the cast of Dancing with the Stars at 48 years old. During one live episode, after finishing a somber routine, she collapsed on the studio floor while the judges were mid-critique. Host Tom Bergeron rushed to her side. When she came to, her first words were reportedly a joke, in keeping with the instinct to find humor even in frightening moments that has defined much of how she talks about her own hardest experiences. She went on to finish that season in third place. That same period brought scrutiny of a different kind. In August 2006, Marie was hospitalized, and some outlets ran headlines suggesting a suicide attempt. Her team pushed back firmly, with her representatives saying she had experienced a bad reaction to medication that caused her to black out. The following year, she and Brian Blosel finalized their divorce after 21 years of marriage. In September 2008, Marie and Donnie opened what was meant to be a 6-week trial residency at the Flamingo in Las Vegas. It became one of the longest-running sibling acts in Vegas history, continuing for 11 years until it closed in November 2019. When it ended, Marie did not frame it as a loss. She described the years ahead as an open door to something different, and rather than launching a solo Vegas act of her own, she began touring with full symphony orchestras instead, eventually releasing a classical album, Unexpected, on her own label in December 2021. In between, in 2019, CBS gave her a permanent seat on The Talk, joining Sharon Osbourne, Cheryl Underwood, Eve and Carrie and Inaba. By the summer of 2020, that arrangement had come apart. Marie announced her departure in August, framing it publicly as a decision to spend more time with her husband after their last 2 children left for college, joking that she and Steve had not been alone together like that since 1982. Multiple entertainment outlets, citing sources close to the show, later reported a different version of events, that Osbourne and Underwood had pushed CBS to remove Marie from the panel, with Carrie and Inaba reportedly the only co-host who fought to keep her. CBS never confirmed that account, and Marie herself never publicly disputed her own stated reason for leaving. What is clear is that she left the way she has left most difficult chapters of her life, without airing the details, without going to war in public, and without asking anyone to feel sorry for her. On January 1st, 2025, Marie's older brother Wayne Osmond died at the age of 73 after suffering a massive stroke at a hospital in Salt Lake City. Wayne had spent decades fighting through serious health battles, including a 17-hour surgery for a brain tumor in 1997, hearing loss that led to a cochlear implant, and an earlier stroke in 2012 that ended his ability to play guitar. His brother Donnie wrote publicly that Wayne had been the ultimate optimist, someone who brought light and laughter to everyone who knew him. His brother Merrill described him as a man of complete humility and no guile. For Marie, it was one more loss layered onto a life that had already asked her to bury her son, her mother, and her father. And yet by every account she has given publicly, in the years leading up to that loss, she had found something closer to peace than she had known for most of her life. A marriage that worked, a daughter she walked down the aisle without hesitation when Jessica married her wife Sarah in 2019, and a career she had reshaped entirely on her own terms. In 2020, and again repeatedly through 2023, Marie made a decision that generated its own wave of headlines, though a far less painful one than the rest of her story. She announced that she does not plan to leave her roughly $20 million fortune to her children when she dies. She has been direct and consistent about her reasoning. That money handed to a child without effort attached to it can rob that child the chance to find out who they are, and that self-worth cannot be bought. She has been careful to clarify that this does not mean she withholds help from her children now, while she is alive. She has said she supports them along the way. Her plan, as she has described it, is to spend what she has earned enjoying her life with her husband, and to give what remains to charity. It is, in its own way, consistent with almost everything else she has said about her own life, that the things worth having are the things you work for, and that the hardest chapters are the ones that end up teaching you the most, if you let them. So, what did Marie Osmond really do at 66 years old that made people stop and pay attention again? She did not name her abuser. She has never done that, and there is no indication she ever will. What she has done patiently, in pieces, across more than 2 decades of interviews, is refuse to let the abuse stay buried. She told the truth in a book when she did not have to. She told Larry King it was real, and it was sexual when she could have said nothing at all. She told a national television audience on The Talk exactly how deeply that abuse had distorted her understanding of herself as a little girl. She told Dr. Oz that she had, in her own way, made peace with the fact that the people who hurt her were gone. None of that required a name. What it required was a woman willing to keep saying again and again over 40 years that it happened, that it was real, and that surviving it did not make her broken. That is the actual story behind the headline, and it is, in its own quiet way, more powerful than the version that gets clicked on. If anything in this story resonates with something you or someone you know is going through, support is available. In the United States, the National Sexual Assault Hotline can be reached at 1-800-656-4673, and the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available by call or text at 988.